then you could lose the tax base, and then the polarity at the poor, it's more difficult. And that process has always taken place. And that's what it looks like. And that's what we're operating with now.
How
So
did we, if you look at our own Civil War, which could have been that for us, we could have been pulled apart. That also weakens you for a rising power. I get, how do we survive that period of time? And the other question I have is, do you think we're really there? Because when I travel in the country, again, it's completely anecdotal, but a lot of people, I find those extremes you're talking about, but I see them in the media a lot more than I see them in real life. More people are in the middle than I think you would have any understanding of if you watch the news. I'm curious what your experience is of that. And then how do we make it, I know this sounds a giant question, but what was different at the time of the Civil War that allowed us to get through this and come back together?
Well, of course, at the Civil War, there was a dominant power that militarily beat the other power, and like all of those things, then they were in control, and they created a new world order, a new domestic order, that was, with the various rules of commerce and slavery and such things. It was because they won the power, and it was, on a per capita basis, the worst war we've had. And, so yeah, it was a terrible thing, and that's how that happens, right? And so that was, it's been a while since we've had one of those, but we did. And and regarding your second point, I think that nobody knows exactly how they go. And I do agree with you that the middle is bigger. If you look at, but the extremes are more in control because we have two political parties. So what we have is, roughly speaking, about 30% of the population, 25-30%, is fairly extreme right by measures, and almost violently so. In other words, would be in favor of only overturning the elections and so on. I don't know, maybe not following the rule of law and some such things. About 15% of the population, maybe it's 10-15%, is rather extreme left. So in there, and there's no party for the middle. So in that, you're getting a creating of who wins the primaries and so on tends to be fairly extremist, because 30% of the population represents the majority of the Republican Party, right? Even though there are a lot of moderates. And so what I would believe, what I would hope to, is that the majority of Americans, if you use my estimates, somewhere in the vicinity of 35-45% of the population might be more extreme, but let's call it 35%, and 65% is in the middle, but they don't have a platform, they don't have a leader, they don't have everything, and so you continue to get that polarity. And now, how it moves, it is moving very quickly in a bad way, a conflict way. So measures like what percentage of the population of each of those parties think that it would be better if members of the other party died. Okay, one party has 15% and the other party has 10%. What percentage of the party says I would not want my child to marry a member of the other party? These are significant percentages. So you're seeing this movement in that direction. How does it work exactly? I can't tell you, but it is a fact that, gun rights and the ability to have guns, there are many more guns in America than there are people in terms of that. And some of those people will say, make me, or could be. I'm not saying how far it goes. I don't know anywhere how far it goes. I'm just trying to say that this is a problem. That it is a problem that the middle is not, there's not a strong middle, and there's not a strong pulling together. I think the president of the United States should be bipartisan. I think it would be great if they had a bipartisan cabinet and they brought the people together, and that those in the middle had that commonality that you talked about, and then those in the other, at the extremes, were the odd ones out.
Even if there wasn't civil war, in which obviously all of it doesn't get to that level of extreme, and we all can play a role in that by our own decisions, how we interact with each other, as you said. But even if there isn't, it weakens us along with a financial weakness for a rising power. So tell us a little bit about what's happening in your view with Ukraine and with Russia, what we're doing there, we're supposed to destroy the ruble by our policies. It's gone through the roof. It's creating a different relationship. Tell us what your view is of that, and then how does that relate to what China's looking at? Because you've talked many times about if we were going to war with China, if I'm not misquoting you, very often you said Taiwan could be one of those triggers, obviously. So I'm just curious what your perspective is on Ukraine and Russia, our policy and approach to this, and what does that mean for this changing world order?
Well, like in other conflicts, there are sides. There were the Allied and Axis powers, and maybe they changed where the geography was. But starting in 1900, we had a world that was closest to each other. That you would have a world war, World War One, World War Two, and that means in Europe and the Pacific and so on. And so you have that dynamic now that we're coming quicker together, and there are sides, and there are sides based on a common enemy. So in terms of this conflict, the United States has a great power, which is declining relative to the other powers. There is that emerging conflict. So what's happening in Russia and the Ukraine is part of that greater story in terms of that. China is outside of it. And now, because no one knows how a war is going to transpire, one really learns from the actual war. There are always surprises. This is a very interesting observation now. And China and others are learning, how is this transpiring? And we're learning three big things. We're in the process of learning these three big things. The first is they've kept it to a conventional war. Okay, they have intentionally not gone to make it a nuclear or cyber or chemical war. Okay, that's in a sense good, though there's the risk that it could be. So the first question that we have is Putin going to win or lose, or what would a compromise look like? Okay, Putin winning and Russia winning consists of a few things. First, get control of the eastern part of the Ukraine. Second, have the Russian economy not collapse. But in other words, if it had a contraction of 10 or 15% of GDP, that's a tolerable contraction. And in his view and Russia's view, worth it for getting the eastern part of the UK. Number three is that he remains in power. And number four is that he remains on the world stage, such as go to a G20 meeting.